and welcome back to our Mystery Friday lesson. Today we are going to be looking at history, and I'm going to be telling you about a real woman who was born 200 years ago, and I'm going to be telling you about her life. At the end of this video, I'm going to set you a little task as well. So when we're looking at history, what we're looking at is the past. We are looking at things that have happened in the past, and these things can be events and they can be important people who lived a long time ago. So today we're going to be looking at a woman called Mary Seacole, and she is a really cool woman, and over her lifetime she saw a lot of changes, and she created a lot of change herself. So without much further ado, we're just going to get straight into it. So, okay, this picture right here is a picture of Mary Seacole. Mary Seacole was a black woman who was born 200 years ago in a place called Jamaica, and she was born on the 23rd of November in the year 1805. So I'm going to just show you some pictures of Jamaica to give you a little idea of where she's from. So in the top left hand picture is a picture of a map of Jamaica, and if you look really closely you can see that there's a little red dot, and that is a place called Kingston. Kingston is the capital city of Jamaica, and it's where Mary Seacole was born. Now, Jamaica is an island, so it's a piece of land surrounded by ocean, and it is a very hot country. Now, I couldn't find any pictures of Jamaica 200 years ago, so I put two pictures underneath of what Jamaica looks like now. It is a very hot country. It's got lots of lovely sandy beaches, and at the top right hand corner is also a picture of the Jamaican flag. So those will give you some ideas of what Jamaica is like. You can pause the video here, maybe have a little look at them and have a little chat about what you see and what you notice. Okay, so Mary Seacole was a black woman, as you can see by this picture, and in her time she lived in a time where the world was not very kind to black people at all, and in fact they were quite terrible to black people. And during this time, slavery was something that was done to black people. So they were forced to move from the country that they were born in, which was countries in Africa, and they were taken to places like America and England, and they were forced to work for no money, and they were often treated terribly and hurt by the people who owned them, and they were made to do jobs like farming and cleaning, and they lived very hard lives. Now, Mary Seacole herself was not born a slave. She was not born a slave, and this is because Mary Seacole's mother was Mrs. Grant, and her father was a Scottish army officer called James Grant. And as a result, Mary was born a free person, which means that she was able to live her life like everybody else. However, there were still rules about what black people could do at that time. So even though she was technically free, she still wasn't allowed to live like white people were. She was not allowed to have certain jobs. She was not allowed to vote, and she was not allowed to hold any positions of power. So she couldn't be like a politician or a leader of any kind. Now, Mary Seacole's family, in her family, she had two other brothers and sisters, and her brother was called Edward and her sister was called Louisa. And Mary's mother was very well known where Mary lived in Jamaica because she owned a boarding house. Now, a boarding house is kind of like a hotel, and this was in Kingston in Jamaica where Mary was from, and her mother's hotel was called Blundell Hall. And Mary's mother was kind of a jack of all trades. She wasn't just a boarding house owner. She also was a healer, and a Jamaican healer. So she was kind of like a doctor, and she was known as a doctress. And their job was to use Jamaican medicine and healing practices to make people feel better. And she taught those same practices to Mary. So Mary grew up around medicine and around her mum being both a nurse and a doctor. And in this boarding house, a lot of the people who came were sick and injured soldiers who came to have a respite and to get better. And Mary was trained by her mother to help around the boarding house by helping people to get better. And as a result, Mary was totally inspired by her mother. She wanted to be just like her mum, and she also wanted to be a doctor and healer. Now, when she was 15, she travelled to London for the first time. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of what London looked like for Mary Seacole. This is what London looked like. You can see that the pictures are black and white, kind of like our first picture of Mary Seacole. And that was because at the time there was no such thing as colour photographs. So all photographs were black and white, and anything that wasn't a photograph was usually drawn or painted. And you can see that there are no cars in these pictures either. There are horse-drawn carriages, and you can see that the people are dressed differently in that picture. You might want to pause the video here and have a little bit of a closer look at what's different from the London or the cities that we know now to the London in this picture. So she went to London with her family, and she went there for 1 year. And while she was there, she wanted to learn about medicine in Britain. So she used her knowledge of Jamaican medicine and her knowledge of European medicine together. And in the end, she returned back to the boarding house. So the boarding house kind of looked like this. It would have been a room in which soldiers would have been laying sick in beds, and the women who were doctresses, including Mary Seacole, would have been moving around the room and helping them and administering medicine and making them feel better. So in 1823, Mary Seacole returned to England, and this time on her own, and she stayed there for 2 years. While she was there, she said she found it really, really difficult because she faced a lot of racism. And what racism is where people are very unkind to you because of the colour of your skin. So because Mary Seacole was black, people in that time were very horrible to her, and they said horrible things. And she found this time very, very difficult. Then in 1825, because she loved travelling like her father, she travelled around a number of islands surrounding the Caribbean and surrounding Jamaica. So you can see on this little map here, you can see Jamaica. So whilst Mary Seacole was travelling in 1825, she travelled to Haiti, which is just that little bit off the Dominican Republic. She travelled to Cuba, and she travelled to the Bahamas. So she travelled around learning more and more about medicine as she went and how to be a doctor and a nurse. And she was just learning and picking up all this information. In 1826, she went back home. So she went back home to Jamaica. And whilst she was there, she married a man called Edwin Horatio Seacole. And I had to look up his name. His name was Edwin Horatio Seacole. And she married him in 1836. Unfortunately for Mary Seacole, this began quite a sad part of her life, because in 1844 he died after becoming very ill. And at the same time, her mother, who had inspired her to be a healer and to work in medicine, also died. And Mary found this time really hard because she'd lost her husband and she'd lost her mother all in the same year. So then, in 1850, something changed. And in 1850, what changed was they had a pandemic, and that pandemic was called cholera. The illness was called cholera. Now, it's kind of like today where we have illness that is going around and it is hurting people. That she was growing up in a time when the same thing was happening. Now, cholera was a very, very horrible disease. And Mary Seacole worked a lot with people who become sick with cholera, and during this time she travelled around helping people who were sick with cholera, and she actually invented her own way of helping people who had become sick, and it turned out to be quite effective. In 1851, she saved her first patient, and she was seen as key in helping people to survive cholera. On top of that, in 1853, she was asked by the British Army at the time to be in charge of a nurses' station at the British Army's headquarters, which was a big deal that they were asking her to come and help out with people who were found this to be a really useful experience, because while she was working for this nurses' station headquarters at the British Army, she managed to rebuild her mother's Blundell Hall, which had been burnt down in a fire, and she turned it into a hospital. And while she was there, she was helping soldiers who were sick and injured. And she found during this time that because she had no children, she found that she built this really great relationship with the people who were sick, and she was helping to make them better. And it started to coin her the nickname. So she was given a nickname by the soldiers, which was Mother Seacole. She was called Mother Seacole because they saw her as their mother, because she would look after them so kindly and was so caring towards the people she was looking after. So then another thing changed. I know, she saw a lot of changes during her time. Another thing changed, and Britain went to war. The Crimean War lasted for 3 years. It started in 1853 and ended in 1856. And it was Britain and a number of other countries fighting the Russian Empire. So Mary, inspired by her time working with soldiers, went back to England from Jamaica and begged the British Army to let her go out to the Crimean War and help in the war effort. And sadly, she was refused. And all Mary wanted to do was to help the soldiers, because she'd heard that they had very poor medical facilities. So they didn't have good hospitals or care for the soldiers. So a lot more soldiers were dying. So Mary was shocked that the British Army had turned her down. But unperturbed, because Mary never took no for an answer, Mary decided that she was going to go out anyway. So what she did is she raised money and paid her way out to the front lines of the Crimean War, to a place called Baklava. And when she was there, she established a British hotel with a man called Thomas Day, who happened to be a family member of her husband who had died. And they built this hotel, and it was a safe place for British soldiers to come to be looked after whilst they recovered from being in the war, but also from having gotten sick whilst fighting. And again, it probably would have looked something like this. Now, when I say it was a hotel, it wasn't really a hotel. It was more like a hospital. And while she was working there, she would help the sick and injured soldiers get better. And it's important to note that at the same time as Mary Seacole was doing this, there was another famous woman also doing amazing things as a nurse. And her name, you might have heard of, is Florence Nightingale, and famous as Florence Nightingale during this time. So Mary Seacole was just as famous and just as well known as Florence Nightingale at this point in time. They were both well known as women who helped the soldiers get better. And the thing about Mary Seacole's hospital is that it was closer to the front line, so she would often herself go out onto a battlefield where people were shooting and where people were fighting, and she would help to nurse sick and injured soldiers and take them back to her hospital so they could get better. So she was really cool because she was walking on to battlefields where there were soldiers fighting, and she was helping to carry people back to the hospital where they could get better. And this is where the name Mother Seacole became even bigger, and people started to use it. Rather than calling her Mary Seacole, a lot more people called her Mother Seacole. And after this, and after war ended, Mary Seacole returned to Britain. But when she returned to Britain, she returned with very little money, and she was becoming very, very poor. And the British soldiers whose lives she had saved decided that this was not okay. So what they did is they decided to raise some money, and they wrote to newspapers, telling newspapers about how amazing Mary Seacole had been for them and how many lives she had saved. And people started to hear her name more and more, and they decided to hold a fundraiser where even the royal family came to this fundraiser. 80,000 people showed up and gave money to help Mary Seacole. And not long after this, she published a book about her life, which became an instant bestseller. Everybody wanted to know about Mary Seacole and the amazing things she had done. Now, sadly, in 1881, at the age of 76, so she lived a good long life, she died. But this is not the end of Mary Seacole's story. This is not the end of her story at all. In fact, Mary Seacole's story was lost to history for 100 years. So for 100 years, people didn't know who Mary Seacole was. They forgot about her, and nobody had heard of her. But then something amazing happened. Some nurses came to visit the UK from the Caribbean, and one of the places they went to was Mary Seacole's grave in London. And when they were there, they came to say thank you to Mary Seacole for all she had done for medicine. After all, she had not only built a hospital during a war and saved multiple soldiers' lives, but she had also helped to create cures for cholera and had saved people during the cholera pandemic. So she was pretty amazing. And after that, people started to hear about her story, and it was decided that a statue would be built in her honour. And this is the statue. It currently resides outside St. Thomas's Hospital in London. And in 2004, she was voted the best Black Briton. She was the greatest Black Briton in 2004. That's what she was voted. And this is people paying respects to Mary Seacole's statue outside this hospital in London. Before I finish my story, I did just want to show you these two other pictures of Mary Seacole. So the one on the left is a painting that's in the National Portrait Gallery in London of Mary Seacole. And you can see on her shoulder, you can see that she has got medals. And again, in the photograph next to her, where she's wearing her military uniform, nurses and doctors uniform, you can see again she's got her medals on her shoulder and got some medical implements from that time. And I would encourage you to have a little look at these pictures of her and to see what you notice. Again, you can pause the video, have a little look at those pictures, see what you notice, see what you can see and what it might tell you about who Mary Seacole was. And she was a really impressive woman, as I say. So she lived this amazing life. And what I want you to do, this is your task for the end of this video. What I would like you to do is to go away and find out about somebody from history. I would like you to think of a person that you would like to find out more about. Now, you could look at somebody like Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong was one of the first men to, well, in fact, he was the first man to stand on the moon. You might want to learn about Florence Nightingale or Betsy Cadwallader, who also lived at the same time as Mary Seacole and were both women who were nurses during the Crimean War. You might want to find out about the Queen, or maybe Queen Victoria or Henry VIII. You can choose anybody from history that you would like to find out more about. Maybe you can have a look at a list of famous people and choose one that gets your interest. And then what I would like you to do is to go away and find out about their story. And I would then like you to create your own little project. Now, I'm going to give you free reign with this project. You could create a video like me. You could create a book about this person. You could go away and write a fact file. You could type it up on the computer and make it look fancy with pictures. Whatever you choose to do, I would love to see your little project about somebody from history. And I would like for you to tell their story about their lives. And if you can, I would love for you to post them on Teams so both me and Miss Andrews can find out more about other people, famous people from history. And so other children on Teams can also find out more about people from history. I think that would be really great if you could share those. So together we can all learn about people like Mary Seacole and the other famous people from history that you find out more about. Now, also in the description below, I'm going to link another video that you might like to watch about Mary Seacole's life from the BBC, just as an added thing you might want to look at and find out a little bit more. But as I say, your task that I'm setting you today is to go away and do a little project about somebody famous from history. I cannot wait to see the amazing famous people you find out about. Okay, so I'll see you soon. Bye!